Hello and welcome to Threads of Fate. I am your host, Kira Ryberg. Today we are here with the first official forecast episode on the podcast. And I'm really excited about this because when I first got into astrology, I used to write monthly horoscopes for each rising sign that were egregiously long. And then I moved into doing weekly forecasts, tracking the transits of the moon. And I kind of took a break for a little while, and this is my re-entry into the world of forecasting, at least in this kind of context. And I'm really excited to be back at it. So I hope you guys enjoy it. July is a pretty big month. We've got some really exciting and just major moments in the sky happening. And I'm excited to be your guide for all of that. So let's go ahead and dive in with the top of the month. Things really get going on July 4th, I'll say. I feel like we've got a couple things that go down in the sky this day that really bring us into a whole new reality, whole new version of what we're going to be experiencing anyway in our personal lives and the collective. And that is because we are going to have Venus conjoining Uranus at 29 degrees of Taurus. And then right after that, Venus is going to move into Gemini. And we also have Neptune stationing retrograde for the first time in Aries. And this all happens on the same day. So, needless to say, it's a lot. Now, this isn't going to be the last time that we experience Venus conjoining Uranus and Taurus at 29 degrees. We also get this next year in April, which always good to remember because whenever transits happen at the same degree, they tend to kind of ping a similar storyline in your life. And so take note of what kind of comes up for you, especially around the Taurus part of your chart, Venus kind of related themes, because you're likely going to be revisiting them in April of 2026. Now, Venus is at home in Taurus. She's in domicile there. She's very happy to be there. It brings us into a place where we get embodied, we get slow, we become focused on pleasure, on relationships, on our desires. And it's kind of a place of slowing down, enjoying the moment, smelling the roses. Now, when Venus conjoins Uranus, this changes. Because Uranus is a planet of upheaval, of chaos, of rebellion. And Venus conjoining Uranus, she signifies relationships and creativity, beauty, right? All of those types of things. So their conjunction in the sky blends their significations together. And we usually see major shakeups, both in our lives and kind of in the world at large, within those different themes, mainly relationship stuff. It's very common to see kind of like celebrity breakups around this time, or, oh, surprise, like the celebrity is having a baby, or something like that. In our own lives, it tends to feel like there's an opportunity arising for us to change our patterns and the ways that we approach the relationships and connections that we are currently devoted to, both with ourselves and with other people. Because really, Taurus is a fixed earth sign, it is the most fixed of the fixed, right? It is hard to change our operating mode when we've already kind of had a tried and true method for a long time that we've been working with. Now, when Venus and Uranus conjoin, it starts to change our processing around this stuff. It's like, oh, maybe I could leave this relationship. Maybe I could initiate this connection with this person. Maybe I want to really shift the ways that I'm showing up in my connections, right? Maybe I don't like this food anymore. Maybe this music is just boring me when I used to be obsessed with it, right? It doesn't always need to be some grand major event. And I think that's important to remember when we're doing any kind of forecasting, but especially when we're talking about transits. We all have individual natal charts, right? I have a chart, you have a chart, they probably look very different. And because of that, our experience of transits is going to be majorly different. There are going to be similar threads that run through the different transits, maybe a thread of fate, one could say. But the way that we experience it is going to probably impact different areas of our lives. So we have different rising signs, right? Venus might represent different people in our chart. For example, if you have Taurus in the third house, this shakeup that Uranus and Venus kind of brings to the table, it might not even happen to you. It might happen to your sibling, it might happen to a friend, right? Versus if you have it in the seventh house, it might happen to a business partner or to your spouse. So there's different parts of the chart that they're going to hold this story. And it's kind of important to think about that whenever you're listening to a forecast from me, from anybody else. And also considering, is Venus even activated for you right now? If you have no idea what that means, there's these different things called Time Lord techniques. It's a very fancy, schmancy, traditional academic way of saying, is the planet calling the shots for you at a given point in your life? One of the major ways that we do this is through something called annual perfections. If you don't know what that is, I've got a blog post for free on my website. Go check it out. You'll have your mind blown. It's really, really cool to see the way that astrology unfolds and that our threads of fate are constantly being woven into the fabric of the cosmic tapestry. Perfections are one of those ways. And they also help us get more specific about what transits are going to be important for us. So, for example, if you're in a Taurus perfection year, right, or if you have Venus activated as a quote unquote time lord, then this Venus Uranus conjunction is going to be more significant for you. And if you have any placements towards the final degrees of fixed signs, Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, Aquarius, this is going to be more relevant for you. So we always just want to make sure that we're really thinking about the context around this, right? But this conjunction is going to give you the opportunity to make some changes in your life, to shake up the ways that you are approaching the Taurus part of your chart, and to really kind of get real with yourself around your behaviors, your preferences, what you want, and be honest about that and take steps towards changing the path you're on so you can find greater joy. And I think that's kind of the best case scenario for this. It can also feel like a marked change in terms of creative inspiration, what you love and value, and then just those surprising developments in relationships, like we already talked about. Now, right after Venus conjoins Uranus at 29 degrees, she's going to fly in to Gemini. And this is a total change of pace, right? Venus in Taurus is slow, she's sensual, she's embodied. Venus in Gemini is a little social butterfly. She's flying here, she's flying there, she's sharing information. And that is her way of relating and connecting when she's in Mercury's sign. Venus in Gemini is like the person who's always sending you memes and being like, this made me think of you, or is like finding this super random, obscure article that made them go down a rabbit hole recently and sharing that with you, right? In Gemini, we're focused on the dissemination and the spread of ideas. And so that is kind of the way Venus likes to love when she's in Gemini. She's like, let me tell you about this thing, right? Let's listen to this podcast together. What do you think about this? That's the Venus and Gemini kind of approach. And so for all of us, this is going to bring a little bit more of a chatty, social, flirty energy into the picture. That's also a lot more external, right? Gemini is what we call a diurnal sign, whereas Taurus is a nocturnal sign. You can think about this just in the context of what happens in the light of day versus what happens under the cover of night. Venus and Taurus, a little bit more sensual, a little bit more pleasure focused, right? Like a good meal, a good glass of wine, having a fun time, a good date with someone that you really are interested in. That's kind of Venus and Taurus. Venus and Gemini is like, let's go to brunch and like have a fun time and invite our friends. Then, let's go shopping and then let's go here and let's go there. It's busy, it's active, it's external. So there's going to be a bit of a change of pace when Venus moves into Gemini. She also doesn't have a lot of dignity in the first part of Gemini or the last. She gets a little sweet spot in those mid degrees where she has a bound and a decan. And that's when her creative force really, really comes out and expresses itself. So more towards the middle of the month, there's going to be this, creative explosion a little bit that allows you to put beautiful, witty, communication out into the world. So if you're looking for a good time to do that, mid-July is the one. But that is also happening on July 4th. And then, just to top it all off, because we're not done here, Neptune is going to station retrograde for the first time in Aries. And this is going to be a pretty big deal because, one, Neptune is starting this journey, this long, long time in Aries of idealizing and glorifying that sign and all of its characteristics, right? So, Neptune in Aries, it tends to kind of put the mythic quest on a pedestal where it's like, everyone is like on their own journey. It's the hero's journey, right? I think of Joseph Campbell, who literally wrote the hero's journey and kind of popularized the mono myth, quote unquote. which is literally like he has a Jupiter Mercury cazimi in the first decan of Aries. So it's like so this kind of quality of things, right? This feeling that we're all on this grand mythic quest that we have to go and we have to face these battles and fight these metaphorical dragons, right? And then through that process, we learn things about ourselves, we heal, we come back with something to share with the world. That's kind of the essential nature. It's like trial by fire, right? And Neptune in Aries is all about idealizing that. Now, Saturn is also in Aries right now. Saturn is a little bit more realistic. Saturn's like, listen, you might think that this thing seems super cool and great and amazing, but it's actually going to be really hard. And there's going to be a lot of challenges, and you're going to suffer for it. And I'm thinking of Saturn in Aries. I kind of titled that transit Painful Creations because Aries is the very first sign of the zodiac. And it's where we struggle to be born, where we struggle to make something of ourselves, right? It's the sun's exaltation. So it is a journey of the self, but it's also Mars's domicile. So we're fighting for the self, right? We're fighting for survival. We're fighting to make it in the world. And then Saturn comes in and is like, okay, you want to do all these things. Well, like time to put the work in. And the work is going to feel painful. It's going to feel hard. It's going to feel burdensome, right? But right now, we've kind of got this Neptune rose-colored glasses thing battling it out with Saturn. So it's like we're holding the dream in one hand and we're holding the harsh reality in the other. And there can be some confusion and distortion of how the story is really playing out. So discernment is key, whilst also holding space for the fact that discernment's not really going to be as easy to tap into because of this transit. So when Neptune stations retrograde on July 4th, all of a sudden, Saturn was kind of coming towards Neptune. Neptune's looking ahead. Now Neptune turns around. They're facing each other dead on. And while they don't make their exact conjunction, they get within a couple arc minutes of one another, which means they become very, very close. They can see each other now. And this kind of intensification is going to bring the reality versus the dreamy, kind of mystical, delusional side of Neptune to a head. So during this time, think about what has been kind of beginning to unfold in Aries since the start of the year, and especially since May 25th when Saturn entered into the sign, and realize that this is going to be a big intensifier for that storyline. And it also means that Neptune's heading back into Pisces, right? So there's certain things that happened in Pisces that Neptune's not done with quite yet. It's almost like Neptune has to go back to the start of the journey, to the end of the last story, actually, and get some more information before it can really begin its journey through Aries in earnest. And this kind of face off with Saturn is a part of that story, a hard look at reality and being like, oof. Someone kind of splashed some cold water on me, and now I don't necessarily see it in the same vivid, exciting, magnetic way. That doesn't mean what you're starting in Aries has to be a bad thing or has to be only hard, but it's about holding space for both of those planets to be there because that's what's required of us right now. So that is all happening on July 4th. So we really start the month with a bang. And then just to keep, the good times rolling on July 7th, Uranus is going to enter Gemini for the first time in like 80 something years, and this is going to be a big transit for people who have any placements, whether it's a lot, whether it's an angle, whether it's a planet at early degrees of mutable signs, Gemini, Virgo, Sagittarius, and Pisces. Anyone who's in a Gemini perfection year is also going to feel this one a little bit more. Before Uranus stations, there's going to be almost like this foreshadowing, this preview period of what's to come when Uranus re-enters Gemini in 2026, because we're not done with the Taurus story yet, like we were saying before, right? There's a little bit more of something that needs to happen there, that needs to change in that part of our charts before we can fully emerge and immerse ourselves into the Uranus and Gemini story. But this little first bit of the transit it's the appetizer to the main course, right? It's a little bit of a preview. So take note of what happens, especially as it relates to the Gemini house in your chart. Now, on a general kind of level, right? Uranus and Gemini is here to cause social disruption. There's been a lot of wars waged on US soil with Uranus and Gemini, which I'm not casting any predictions around. I am merely stating the facts there. And that's because there is social rebellion, right? Gemini is a sign of people talking, right? You get everybody talking about change, you get everybody talking about upheaval, and those things start to happen. And so that can be one of the ways that Uranus and Gemini manifest. But Gemini is also about defying binaries, right? About saying that it doesn't need to be such black and white thinking, which I think we're very trapped in right now as a society, right? It has to be this way or that way. And in Gemini, it's like, no, it doesn't. It can be both. It can be the gray area. And so Uranus and Gemini is going to change our ways of thinking and our ways of communicating our ideas and our opinions to the world. There's also probably going to be a major change in the ways that we approach technology, right? If you think the AI train is bad now, ooh, I am I'm a little bit scared for how this Uranus and Gemini transit is going to impact that because it tends to bring major technological advancements. In the past, it kind of coincided with the creation of the Polaroid camera, the first general purpose electronic computer, the microwave oven, the atomic bomb, and just like other funny things like rubber and super glue, right? These kind of inventions that do change the ways that we approach society. Also, during Uranus and Gemini transit, we saw airline travel become a lot more popular. So I would not be surprised if this ends up coinciding with some big just like revolutions in innovation with aviation. So, I don't know if that's like hover cars or getting planes that go a lot faster, having trains that operate at a much, much higher speed, right? Being able to get from point A to point B a lot more quickly. And in another way, it's just going to bring a spirit of invention and innovation to the table, which I'm really excited for, but it's mostly going to be the things that impact the ways we communicate and commerce, coin, transportation, those different things that Mercury is in charge of, right? And that kind of have more of an external facing quality, because again, Gemini is a diurnal sign. So that is a little bit about Uranus and Gemini. And it's really going to impact those people who have those early degree placements the most right now. We're going to be doing Uranus and Gemini for, a good couple of years still. So it's going to be unraveling. But I tend to think of Uranus as just bringing change. It brings shakeups. Sometimes that's wanted and sometimes that's not. Sometimes that's exciting and sometimes that's just daunting, right? For a lot of people, you see a Uranus transit coming, it's like, like, aren't we done with the change? Aren't we done with the upheaval? And Uranus is just saying, no, 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 we're not. There's more on the agenda. So think about what house Gemini occupies for you because your approach to those topics in life is what's really going to be up for review. And when we say review, we really mean like it's going to go through a massive overhaul. So that is starting this month. And I am a Gemini rising. So I'm both terrified and excited for this transit. I'm like, you know what? Bring it on. And I'm early degrees too. So, like, you're going to witness whatever this transit is through the podcast. And we can only hope that it's good changes, right? But I don't think Uranus is good or bad. And it just is, right? Outer planets, they tend to be a little bit more like they have positive expressions, more challenging expressions, as do all the planets, but they're morally neutral, I think. So, it's just like whatever isn't fixed in your life, whatever is up for potential change is coming in and it's going to say, all right, time to rewrite the script here, and that's really the Gemini way. So I'm keen to see how this progresses and what happens for you guys, what happens for me. It's going to be a big one. And this month kicks it off. So sometimes you've just been staring at a transit for so long that you're like, bring it on. And that's kind of how I feel about Uranus and Gemini. But check in with me in a few months. I might be whistling a different tune. All right. Moving on to July 10th, we have a full moon at 18 degrees of Capricorn. Now, the full moon in Capricorn is always an interesting one to me, similar to the full moon in Scorpio, because the moon doesn't tend to feel super hot when she's in Capricorn. And what I mean by that is that she's under resourced there, right? It's a sign of her detriment. She's ruling the sun in Cancer, and then all of a sudden has all of these responsibilities placed on her, and she's tired. She's just like not up for it. but it's also the climax in her cycle. It's when she's the brightest in the sky. So this can kind of create this feeling of being both tired and wired at the same time, where you're so exhausted, but you can't sleep, or there's so much going on and all you want to do is rest, but you can't. So if you can try to take it easy around this day, July 10th, July 9th, that would definitely be my recommendation for you. And make sure you're giving yourself grace, make sure you're giving other people grace. It's kind of a time where people are just a little bit more burnt out, a little bit more, undernourished. So make sure you're taking care of your body, drinking water, eating good meals, right? Doing the things that you know you should do, but that often fall by the wayside when things get busy. When the moon's in Capricorn, it's almost like that much more important to make sure we are following through with those things because the moon is our physical bodies, right? And it is also our emotions. And the body keeps a score. So if we're not feeling good physically, we're probably not feeling good emotionally. And that can just lead us into a place that we don't necessarily want to be in. So take care around this lunation. But there's going to be also a climax happening with the Cancer and Capricorn parts of your chart. Now, I always like to think with any transit, any planet, everything really, but I like to think about the decans. And the decans that this full moon takes place in are the middle decan of Capricorn and the middle decan of Cancer. And they kind of have similar themes, but in slightly different ways, which is always super fascinating when you consider the polarity happening here, right? Where that second decan of Capricorn, it's so ambitious. It's got big, big dreams, big ideas. It wants to make almost impossible things happen. And we need that, right? We need people who want to challenge the notion of what is possible, but it can also feel like this sense of like, I can't do it alone. I always tell clients it's the Rome wasn't built in one day and it wasn't built by one person placement, but the moon in Capricorn is going to try anyway because the moon in Capricorn doesn't want to be a burden to anybody and so doesn't want to ask for help. The key with this lunation is to ask for help when you need it, and you're going to get that much closer to achieving those big dreams, those big goals that you have in the Capricorn part of your chart. Now, the sun is going to be 180 degrees across from the moon, because that's what happens on full moons, in the second decan of Cancer. And this was one that's a little bit more internal, right? Where it's like the other one is like having these big ideas, wanting to go out into the world and like make something. And this one is a little bit more about nourishing what you've already got, tending to it behind closed doors, pouring a lot of love and care and intention and tenderness into something so that it can grow into its ripest potential. And so we kind of have this sense of creation and ambition. The sun is wanting you to protect what's sensitive and tender and new. And there's a need to almost balance these big dreams and goals that you have and the need and desire to collaborate or the need to collaborate, but not the desire to. With wanting to protect this precious thing that's happening in Cancer. Now, what's nice is that Jupiter is also in Cancer now. Jupiter in the sign of his exaltation. We love to see it, but also our experience of Jupiter in Cancer is going to be shifting all of the time because its domicile lord is the moon, right? And the moon's changing, moves faster than any other planet in the sky, just waxing one day, waning the next, right? Applying to a malefic and then a benefic. So our expression of any planet in Cancer is going to be of the moment, right? It's not going to necessarily be lasting. And so while Jupiter in Cancer is going to try to bring a little bit of hope and optimism into the picture with this, there's also going to be a little bit of a check on that. So if you're feeling like almost like the boundless optimism that Jupiter in Cancer is trying to bring is a little bit harder to access on this full moon. You're not doing anything wrong. That's just kind of the way it's going right now. The moon's also ruled by Saturn in Aries, doing that Saturn Neptune thing that we talked about, right? So the confusion, delusion, what is real, what is not, that's all part of this too, right? So it's kind of a pretty important lunation as it relates back to that Saturn and Aries story, and also as it relates to kind of some of what is unfolding in Cancer as Jupiter really starts to take root there and make some changes. So keep an eye on what comes up for you during this time because it should be one that's, a little bit more significant. And more significant if you're in a Capricorn perfection year, a Cancer perfection year, right? Always coming back to those ideas of which transits mean something for me. If you have placements in cardinal signs, around 18 degrees, I'd say like 15 to 21. That's really going to be the hot spot. If you got placements around there, then you can expect this full moon to show up a little bit more loudly for you in your lived experience. Moving right along, we get to July 13th, where Saturn is going to station retrograde at 1 degree of Aries. This marks a turning point in the Saturn and Aries story, right? It is where he turns away from Neptune now, kind of turns his back on Neptune and is like, listen, ugh, like you're annoying me. I'm going back to Pisces. I'm going back over there. And while Saturn is peregrine, which means doesn't have a lot of dignity, isn't very comfortable in Pisces, Saturn does rule the final bound of Pisces. So he has a little bit of dignity in that final part of the sign that's actually more supportive for Saturn than being in Aries, where he is in his fall. So I actually think that like he's kind of going back. He's like, listen, like I want to get back to where it feels good for me, where I've got a little bit more ability to exert my will and I don't have to deal with Neptune, right? And the thing about this part of the zodiac this year, the first decan of Aries and the final decan of Pisces, it's a story of beginnings and endings. And it's one that we have already been doing for all of 2025 and one that we're going to be doing for the rest of 2025. Because not only is it Saturn and Neptune stationing retrograde in the first decan of Aries and going back to Pisces, but Mercury also did this. The node shifted from, or the north node moved from the first decan of Aries into the last decan of Pisces, and Venus stationed retrograde at 10 degrees, so in the second decan. But very quickly after that, she spent the majority of her retrograde in that first decan of Aries before retrograding back into Pisces. So think back to what happened when those two transits were occurring. See what was going on with that Mercury and Venus retrograde. That's going to be very critical information for understanding some of what is going to continue to unfold when Saturn and Neptune both regress back into Pisces. Venus and Mercury were kind of doing the story of the head and the heart. Venus entered into Aries first, and she was starting to be like, oh, I really want a new beginning. I want something fresh. I want something exciting. I want to make something, right? And then Mercury came in and was like, but does it make sense though? Is it logical? Is it rational? Can we actually make this happen? Let's make a plan, And then they had to go back into Pisces, rework the script, realize that, oh, I forgot something back there. I need to tie up some loose ends. I can't really get this whole thing off the ground right now, but I'm thinking about it and I'm feeling about it, but it's not time yet. So they went back into Pisces, then went back into Aries, did their little jaunt, kind of got things moving again. Then Saturn and Neptune moved into that first decan of Aries. Neptune started idealizing, glorifying, right? Oh, it'd be so good. Why wouldn't we do this? It's going to be amazing, right? It's going to be the solution to all my problems. And then Saturn joined on May 25th and was like, you thought? You thought? Like, it is not. It is not going to be that easy. Here's the dose of reality. And so now we're kind of doing the same backwards dance into Pisces with these two planets of realizing, like, oh, actually, maybe this whole new world that I want to build in Aries, I'm not ready for that quite yet. I need to tie up some final ends, some final strings in Pisces before we can really get back to that fresh start and go at it again. Right. So that is kind of the story that's happening here. I wrote a whole article on this for my patrons. If you're not a member of my patron page, go ahead and subscribe. I've got like something like 80 articles on there, and this is one of them. And it also just helps support the show. But if you want to learn more about this kind of the dance, I was calling it the Aries Pisces threshold tango, I think. If you want to read about the tango, threshold tango, then go check that out. But this is going to be a big part of that storyline, both Neptune and Saturn stationing retrograde this month, about a week apart. It's all connected. Like none of these transits are happening in isolation. They're connected to what Mercury and Venus were doing earlier in the year. They're connected to that nodal shift, right? They're all kind of weaving different threads of fate into the same tapestry. We're going to keep using that metaphor over and over and over again, I'm sure. So that is going to be the 13th of July. Then on the 18th, Mercury is going to station retrograde at 15 degrees of Leo. And so we are back doing the Mercury retrograde stuff again. I think Mercury and retrograde, you start talking about Mercury retrograde and you stop being able to talk. I think Mercury retrograde gets a really bad rap, gets a lot of bad press, which is also just hysterical given the fact that Mercury is pretty neutral, does not care if you're saying good things or bad things about them. They just like that you're talking about them, right? And so I love the time when people are like, oh, Mercury's in Gatorade again. It's just like, it's funny to me. I'm like, oh, Mercury. You're just doing your thing, right? But I really like to reframe the way that we think about Mercury retrogrades because we tend to think of them as being very annoying. And certainly there can be annoyances, right? Like it is annoying when you send the wrong text to the wrong person, or when your flight gets delayed, or when you're having tech issues every time Mercury goes retrograde and I'm doing client stuff, which is always the amount of technical difficulties that happen is like, it's comical, right? And it's easy to get annoyed and frustrated that things aren't moving at the pace that we want them to, or aren't kind of going as smoothly as we might hope that they would. But also, it would be weird if things were good all of the time. I know I say it all the time on the podcast, but I'm going to say it forever because it's so true. Like this idea of progress and productivity and perfection that is impressed upon us by society is just not realistic. It's not how any other being operates, right? And I think Mercury retrogrades are an invitation to slow down, to say give yourself a little bit of breathing room, some time, some space, move with greater intention, right? Double check who you are sending that message to before you send it, right? Double read, double check, double read. Gosh, Mercury retrograde. It's like I've invoked the spirit of Mercury retrograde now. But, you know, cross your T's, dot your I's, read the fine print, read it again. It doesn't mean you can't do things during Mercury retrogrades. It just means you have to do them with a little bit more of a buffer, right? Not the time if you have a flight to be like, oh, I'll leave a little late. Like leave early, like get there before you think you need to be, right? If you know you get stuck in traffic every day, don't leave late, leave early, right? It's just that stuff. It's like Mercury is responsible for communication, for transportation, right? All of those types of things. So those are usually the areas where we see the most difficulty, along with wherever Mercury is transiting in your chart. So Mercury is going to be in Leo. Think about what house that is for you. If you're using whole sign houses, it will just be one, which makes it super simple. And that is also going to tell you what storyline is being reworked and revisited. This is also likely tied into the Mars retrograde in some way, shape, or form that we experienced in Leo and Cancer earlier this year, because Mars stationed retrograde at 6 degrees of Leo. And we have the Mercury cazimi happening around 9 to 8 degrees of Leo. So it's like right on that same little range of degrees that is a little bit sensitive in Leo this year, where we keep kind of pinging that same storyline. So think about what happened for you, both when Mars stationed retrograde and when Mars went back to 6 degrees, if you want to do a little bit of, personal astrobiography work. It's going to tell you more about how this transit is going to play out for you. Now, Mercury in Leo is one to say it loud and proud, right? Say it with your chest kind of energy. And when Mercury stations retrograde, it can be a little bit more like, ooh, I said that really confidently, and now I'm not so sure, right? Like thinking back on things that you said with utter and complete certainty, and then realizing maybe I didn't say that the right way, And in Leo, we're always on the quest for authenticity. We're always trying to be the boldest version of ourselves. And when Mercury's here, we're kind of talking the talk with that. And this transit certainly starts off a little bit rougher than it gets because the sun is going to move into Leo a couple of days after Mercury stations retrograde. And that's going to bring a lot more resources to Mercury so we can gain a little bit more clarity around the storyline. When it begins, you're probably going to feel a little fuzzy, a little bit hazy, because if you think about where the sun is in the sky when Mercury's in Leo and sun's in Cancer, right? These are signs that we say are averse to each other. It means they do not see each other. There's no aspect between them. Aspect comes from the word aspectus, which means to look at. And the planets are quite literally not looking at each other. You can imagine if I'm not looking at you and you're not looking at me, how are we going to communicate, right? And if I need something from you and we're not able to see one another, we're not able to talk to one another, it's going to be very hard for me to get what I need. Same thing applies in this situation. So the first couple of days of this Mercury retrograde, right? Mercury's like calling up the sun, being like, dude, I need help. I'm trying to rework some stuff over in the Leo part of my chart. And I need to like rethink the ways that I'm approaching my communication strategies and all of this. Can you help me out? And the sun is literally just like la di da di dying and not answering the phone. Once the sun enters Leo on the 22nd, things are going to shift and get a lot easier, but kind of expect that that first week is going to be a little harder than the rest. Now, on the 20th, we have Mars conjoining the South Node. This will really be in effect all that week, really from, I'd say the 3 degree range tends to be the most intense part of any transit. So once a planet gets within 3 degrees of another one, that application is on and we start feeling the effects, even if the exact aspect hasn't happened yet. So, really, from the 15th to the 20th, you're going to be feeling this. Now, Mars South Node stuff tends to be a burnout indicator. When I see it in people's charts in the solar return chart, it's people who push, push, push too hard and then kind of get knocked on their ass a little bit and have to take time to recover because they were just so busy expending all of their energy, all of their resources, right, into something. And then you can't go forever. And Mars South Node stuff teaches us that we cannot go forever, right? And sometimes in kind of harsher ways. And so, my recommendation to you would be this week, if you can take it easy, take it easy. Not the time to go bungee jumping, let's say, not the time to put yourself in risky physical situations, right? If you can just delay that for a week or two, that would be for the best. It's a time to say no to things that are going to drain your energy, to put boundaries in place so you're not overextending. This isn't the time to be like working over hours and all of those things. And if you have to anyway, because we live in a society, then make sure you're taking care of yourself in other ways, right? Let's not skip lunch, those types of things, right? Let's make sure you're getting nourishment. Let's maybe ask someone else for help, right? And let's extend a lot of care and compassion to the people around us because everyone's going to be feeling this. The people who are going to be feeling it the most are going to be people in a Virgo perfection year, people in a Scorpio or Aries perfection year, because Mars will be your time lord, right? So all of those people are gonna feel it a little bit more, along with anyone who has placements around 19, 20 degrees of mutable signs. So if you've got something from like 16 to 23 degrees, you're probably going to be feeling this a little bit more. So just be mindful of your energy levels. Try not to overdo it as much as possible, and say no to things that are gonna drain you, right? And that is probably the best way to navigate this transit. Now, around the same time, the 22nd, like we talked about, the sun is going to enter Leo, but during the time that the Mars is going to be approaching and conjoining the South Node, Venus is also going to be approaching her square with Mars. And this is a little tense, this isn't the sweetest, happiest, most joyful, fun aspect of the month, right? Venus is the planet of relationships, creativity, connection, joy, pleasure, right? And she's coming into a conflict with the planet of anger. Like, I never want to sugarcoat things. I also don't want to dramatize things, right? But Venus Mars stuff tends to create tensions in relationship dynamics, and especially in Mercury signs, Mercury ruled signs, because Mars is in Virgo, Venus is in Gemini. It can be like fighting with someone about facts and data, information and opinions, right? Like getting into an argument with someone about politics or something like that, right? Or like, I read this article, well, I'm fact checking you, and I read this article and it says this, right? And we're all kind of in our own echo chambers. And this, Venus Mars square kind of brings that right to the surface and asks us to deal with it, which can feel a little heavy and a little bit challenging, right? It's going to be, you're more likely to get in verbal disagreements with people. So be very intentional about the way that you say things, because you might come to regret it later, because obviously Mercury is also going to be retrograde during this time. So that is one of those moments where you might say something and then kind of have to revisit it because it causes tension in a relationship dynamic. And, that's part of life, right? Generative conflict can be generative, but we can also sometimes say things that we regret. And Venus Mars activations, a little bit more emboldened, like Mars gives you the courage and the audacity, just like say it. And sometimes that's not always the most supportive thing for approaching something in a loving way. So just be kind of aware that that's running in the background. Now, Venus is going to be in the final decan of Gemini, while Mars is going to be in the final decan of Virgo when they're squaring off. That final decan of Gemini tends to be one that's very tightly associated with kind of heavy, weighty decisions, right? It's where we were before entertaining all of these possibilities. Now we have to choose one path. And so Venus squaring Mars, right, is probably going to look like severing either a connection, a project, an idea, some type of pathway, so that you can pursue another one more fully. Mars being in that final decan of Virgo is going to tie this all into relationships, into, I would say, legacy in a way. It's like, what are the connections, creations, pathways that are the most fulfilling for you? What do you want to be remembered for, right? That final decan of Virgo is very concerned with legacy. And so if we're coming over to Gemini, we're having to make this weighty choice and we're kind of severing something off. It's because it's not aligning with that version that we have for ourselves. It's not giving us that end result, right? And the mutable signs, they bring us to the end of a sequence. And so there's going to naturally be kind of a quality of endings that's associated with them, but especially in the final decan, because now we're at the final part of the story of Gemini, the final part of the story of Virgo. And then we see this kind of eruption happen that causes something to have to be left aside. So consider what houses these occupy in your chart, because that's obviously going to give you a lot more context for how important this is. And also remember that it's happening on the tail end of that Mars South Node conjunction. So it's probably going to feel like you're just exhausted and you have no choice now. You have to choose because you're so tired, right? And so this is all, again, it's all part of the same story. Like, I don't really feel like when we look at transits in isolation that it's always super helpful because we lose so much context, right? Like, if we're not thinking about the fact that Mars is also, just conjoined the South Node, that Mercury's retrograde and all of these things are happening, then we're missing out on part of the story. So that is really going to be that Venus-Mars square. So a little bit more of a tense moment towards the end of the month. That goes exact on the 23rd, but it will be forming for a couple days beforehand. So just kind of, be a little bit mindful of that. Like I said, the day before, the sun is going to enter Leo, which is going to make things a little bit easier on the communication front, as we talked about before. But this is also the sun coming home, right? It's the king coming back to his kingdom. And that is going to give us a big boost of confidence, a big boost of that quest for authenticity, feeling like, okay, I can do this actually. There's a little bit more bravado present and a little bit more willingness to put yourself out there, be who you truly are, say what you want, say how you feel, and own that, right? I always think that the sun in Leo is a really nice time of year because it's a warm energy. Obviously, it aligns with the heat of summer, but also it comes back to this story of self-discovery. It's a reorientation around us, around who we are, who we want to be, and how either close or far we are from that point. And it gives us a lot of ideas and inspiration about how to express ourselves in a way that we are truly proud of, right? And it's kind of like a big cheerleader energy. Everyone gravitates around Leos just as we all revolve around the sun, but it's also because they have so much light to share with others that it's not nearly as selfish as I think the stereotype of Leo is, right? There is a big spirit of generosity in Leo. And I think when the sun transits through that sign, we all benefit. We all kind of feel a little bit more of that warmth, that glow. We have a little bit more self-belief. And I think that's always a nice thing, at least for me as an Aquarius sun anyway. I'm like, give me a little bit of a dash of what these other people are having because I know not of this energy in my own chart. Now, on July 24th, we're going to have the new moon in Leo at 2 degrees. And on surface, I kind of like this. I like this new moon. I always like the new moons in Cancer and Leo because we have one of the luminaries in domicile, which really uplifts and supports the other one. That's always really nice. However, this new moon is also occurring in an exact opposition to Pluto in Aquarius because the cosmos operate on a system of checks and balances in which the government of the United States could never, at least with the current administration. Um, tea. But this is gonna, it's otherwise we would have this very full, abundant expression coming through with this new moon in Leo, right? It's like this revival of the self and the journey that we are all on, this kind of brazen confidence and uplifting, warm spirit. And then all of a sudden, Pluto in Aquarius is like, be a shame if someone came in and put a damper on all of that, right? You want to be yourself. Here's a reminder that the system and the collective is not necessarily supporting that, right? Like I always think of Pluto, harsh Pluto aspects as power struggles, right? And if what we are trying to do in Leo is express ourselves to the fullest extent, be our boldest, most beautiful, brightest versions of ourselves, then Pluto in Aquarius kind of reminds us that like, oh, actually the systems and the powers that be don't support that. So it's fighting for it anyway. It's showing up and choosing to be you, even in the face of opposition, even in the face of difficulty. And so there might be some challenges that arise and there might be this struggle to kind of make it, get to the top. That's kind of the story of the first decan of Leo. But there might also be forces at play that are trying to prevent that from happening. So this is it's gonna test you. It's a little bit of a tester new moon of saying, okay, you want to be you. How are you going to show up to be you when, maybe other people don't want you to be you as much? So we kind of see that quality happening here. There's also, the Leo thing of celebrity, the Pluto and Aquarius thing of the everyman is the celebrity. That's not a fully fleshed out. I mean, I have that idea fully fleshed out in my head, but in terms of this new moon, I don't have something super articulate to say on that. But I'm curious to see when the new moon happens, what's going on in the world, because I think that there might be some ways that that kind of storyline shows up that's really going to be interesting to look at. All right. We are making great time. I had no idea how long these forecast episodes were going to be. I'm trying to keep all episodes under an hour. And I know that I'm a chatty Cathy. And I was like, I might do 2 hours on this forecast, but I think we are actually doing really good as we come up to the final day of the month, which is when the next kind of big moments happen. And that is July 31st, obviously. It is going to be Venus entering Cancer. And we also get the Mercury cazimi at 9 degrees of Leo on that day as well. Venus entering Cancer is on the surface like a quite nice transit. I love Venus in Cancer. It's one of those ones that just feels good on a surface, not even a surface level, on like a body level. It's kind of like this sweet, nostalgic, caring, compassionate energy. I always think of Cancer as kind of being like the mom friend. Like, are you okay? Do you need something? Are you hungry? Are you thirsty? And Venus comes in to bring that element to relationships, right? To the ways in which we are connecting with others. And I think that's so sweet. However, Saturn is currently sitting at 1 degree of Aries. So Venus enters into Cancer and she immediately squares off with Saturn, which kind of puts a damper on some of that. The baseline energy of wanting to share, wanting to connect, wanting to nourish and support yourself and the people around you is there. But Saturn is kind of saying no to some of that for some reason. So this can be a time where there's like a little bit of a damper on relationships, where you're running into difficulties, where people are saying no to you. And it's not necessarily the nicest aspect. Venus Saturn squares can be relational difficulties, particularly for people who have night charts. The good news is that Saturn's hanging out at 1 degree. So Venus passes this square very, very quickly. So it's almost like it erupts and there's tension and Saturn says no. And there's kind of like this repression of desire. And then we get to the other side of it and Venus is free, homebound, and she starts making her way towards Jupiter, which is so beautiful, so sweet. They are going to conjoin in Cancer this year. Venus has triplicity dignity in Cancer, which is one of those reasons that she just feels at home here. It feels right. There's certain planets and certain signs where people are like, I swear this planet, it always happens with Mercury in Aquarius. But like, I swear Mercury is exalted in Aquarius and not in Virgo. And it's just that Mercury has triplicity dignity there. Like that's what it is. Same thing with the moon in Pisces, same thing with Venus in Cancer, because it is of their element, right? Like you can say when a planet has triplicity dignity that they are quite literally in a place where they feel comfy. They're in their element. And so because of that, they tend to feel a lot more comfortable. And our experience of those transits or those placements is a little bit nicer, a little bit softer, right? And so Venus in Cancer brings that, but she has to get past that square with Saturn first. We're going to talk about that more next month because that's when it actually goes exact. But just expect that the very first day or two of that Venus in Cancer transit is going to be kind of tinged with an element of doubt, with an element of fear, with an element of melancholy, because Saturn is going to bring that to bear upon Venus. So that's going to be that part of the transit. But we also get the Mercury cazimi in Leo. And if you aren't familiar with what a cazimi is, it essentially is when a planet conjoins the sun within 1 degree. The Hellenistic tradition says 1 degree, the medieval Islamic tradition says more like 16, 17 minutes. I have paid very close attention to this, and I am a firm 1 degree believer, but I also think the closer and closer it gets, the better and brighter and more benefic the cazimi gets as well. So I think they were onto something and with the 16 to 17 minutes, because that is when you get almost like the best expression of the cazimi, the most intense form of it, but it's still active when we're in that 1 degree range. And I've tested this with elections a lot as an electional astrologer, when you kind of pick opportune moments in the sky to act. And I've done things within that 1 degree range and had phenomenal success with it. And so I still think that it's the 1 degree range. But when a planet conjoins the heart of the sun within 1 degrees, the way that they talked about this in the Hellenistic tradition was essentially like the sun is the king the planet has now come and sat on the king's lap. And then the king is like, "Hello, my child, can I get you anything?" And the planet is like, "Yes, please, sir. These are all of the things that I would like." This is a bit of a ridiculous metaphor, but the sun then provides those things, right? It's when a planet becomes protected from the harm that the heat and dryness of the sun can bring, right? It's like you can imagine when you get too close to the sun, when you have too much sun exposure, you get sunburnt, right? The sun is, benefic in a lot of ways, but also like you get too close and it can burn you. But when a planet gets that close, all of a sudden they become embraced by the sun and they're not harmed anymore. And so, within the context of the retrograde cycle, it tends to bring a moment of clarity, almost this aha moment of where you understand what the retrograde storyline is all about, what you're supposed to do here now. Whereas before, it's a little bit like traveling through the dark, right? You're kind of getting scorched by the sun's rays before you enter that place of ease that is the Kazemi. So the Kazemi on the 31st should help you realize what the Mercury retrograde story is all about for you. And then there comes the other side of that where you have to integrate, right? Which is the leaving of the king's lap or leaving of the sun's embrace, and then realizing you have to kind of go back in the dark and figure out, all right, now I have this clarity. What do I do with it? Like, how do I put it into motion? And that's kind of the second part of the retrograde story. So that's what will be coming shortly after. But this day is going to be really nice for feeling like your head and your words are aligned. Like there's a little bit of an alignment of the head and the heart, and being able to say things in a way that you do feel confident about and that you feel correct about and that you feel proud of, So there's a little bit more of this spirit of generosity that comes through the ways in which we are communicating with other people, but also a spirit of authenticity. This is walking the walk and feeling like, oh my God, I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad I said that, right? Because it is a true expression of my selfhood. And that was true to me. And what a nice little way to end the month, We're gonna pretend the Venus-Saturn square isn't doing what it's doing, but at least we do get that Mercury Cazimi in Leo as well, which, especially if you're in a Mercury perfection year, you're in a Leo perfection year, that one might be a little bit more significant for you too. So always remembering that context as we've talked about throughout this forecast. But yeah, that's it. We did it. We got through the month. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I am so excited to be back with forecasting. It's one of my favorite things to do with clients. And so I'm really excited to just be back in a place where I can talk through the astrology of each month. And hopefully you guys got something out of it too. You feel a little bit more prepared, a little bit more ready for what's to come. And thank you for listening. Do all of the things if you enjoyed, support the show, like it on YouTube, subscribe, leave a good review, all of the, mumbo jumbo that takes you about 1 second, but really, really helps the podcast grow. And if you want to support future, episodes of the show and the creation of it, then go ahead and join my Patreon page. That is the best way to support my work on an ongoing basis. And it's going to allow me to continue doing this and putting these episodes out for free. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of Threads of Fate, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye.